Welcome to our deep dive into Romanticism. We've got some really cool sources here that you've provided, and I'm kind of excited to, get into them and see if we can unlock some of the heart of this really fascinating movement.
Yeah, Romanticism, you'll find it's a lot more than just pretty poems and paintings, It's really a response to some huge changes that were happening in European thought and society at the time. So we're going to be kind of like connecting those dots, between the art and the history and how people were experiencing the world back then.
Okay, so one of the things that jumped out at me right away was that it's kind of hard to put an exact date on when Romanticism began.
Yeah, it wasn't like someone just flipped a switch.
Right. It seems like it was more of a gradual shift, kind of like a wave, slowly building momentum.
Exactly. One of our sources points to 1798 as kind of a turning point, though. That's when Wordsworth and Coleridge published their lyrical ballads. And that was seen as a pretty bold departure from the norms of the time.
Okay, so lyrical ballads in 1798. Got it. But to really understand Romanticism, it sounds like we need to go back a bit further to the Enlightenment.
You got it. Because, you see, Romanticism was, in many ways, a reaction against the Enlightenment's emphasis on reason and logic, almost like a pendulum swinging, from one extreme to the other.
Oh, I see. So while the Enlightenment was all about reason, Romanticism was more about emotion, intuition, the things that can't be easily measured or explained.
That's it. And one of the sources describes it as, oh, this is a good quote, the substitution of the critical for the imaginative spirit, you know?
Wow, yeah, that's powerful. It's like they were saying, let's move beyond just analyzing and critiquing everything. Let's tap into our imagination, let's feel things deeply, and let's express ourselves in new and creative ways.
Exactly. The Romantics were all about breaking free from those old rules and conventions that had defined art and literature for so long.
So instead of focusing on objective truth, like the Enlightenment thinkers did, the Romantics were more interested in the subjective experience, the way individuals perceive and feel the world around them.
Exactly. Our sources describe them as really valuing the uncalculated and spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings.
The uncalculated and spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. I like that. Okay, so we're starting to get a sense of how Romanticism emerged as this sort of reaction to the Enlightenment. But now, let's get into the specifics. What are the key characteristics that make something romantic?
Ah, the million-dollar question. Well, one of the biggies is this fascination with mystery and wonder. The Romantics were all about finding the extraordinary in the ordinary, seeing the world through a lens of, well, just awe and possibility.
Okay, so instead of shying away from the unknown, the Romantics kind of like ran towards it. They were drawn to those mysterious elements of life that we can't always explain.
Yes. One source describes it as like a subtle sense of mystery that kind of permeated their whole worldview, you know? And they found beauty and wonder not just in those big landscapes, but also in everyday
It's
things.
like they were trying to like re-enchant the world.
I like that. Re-enchant the world. And speaking of enchantment, another biggie is their deep love for nature.
Oh, yeah, nature. Our sources are full of examples of that. We see Wordsworth expressing, wonder in the world of nature. And Shelley and Keats, they saw nature as embodying beauty and tranquility.
Absolutely. For the Romantics, nature wasn't just a pretty backdrop. It was a source of inspiration, of spiritual insight.
Yeah, a mirror reflecting human emotions.
Exactly. They felt deeply connected to nature, like it was an extension of themselves.
So it wasn't just about appreciating the beauty of like a sunset, it was about feeling a deeper connection, almost like a sense of belonging.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it. And speaking of connections, the Romantics were also drawn to the past, especially the Middle Ages.
Interesting. Why the Middle Ages, though? What did they see in that era?
Well, they were really drawn to the idea of it, that sense of beauty and remoteness. They saw it as this period of greater simplicity and spiritual connection, kind of stark contrast to their own rapidly industrializing world.
Yeah, it makes sense. If you're feeling overwhelmed by all the changes happening around you, you might start looking back to a simpler time.
Right. And this yearning for simplicity also ties into another big characteristic of Romanticism, their focus on the individual.
Ah, yes, the individual. So while the Enlightenment was all about universal truths, Romanticism was more about highlighting the unique experiences and perspectives of each person.
Exactly. And you see this in their literature. One source talks about their interest in uh, The humble emotion of the simple man.
The humble emotion of the simple man. It wasn't about grand narratives or historical figures. It was about the inner lives of everyday people.
Exactly. And this idea of the noble savage, popularized by Rousseau, that fits right into the Romantic worldview. The idea that humans are inherently good but corrupted by civilization.
Right, that yearning for a simpler, more authentic way of life.
Okay, so we've got mystery and wonder, love of nature, a fascination with the past, and this focus on the individual. What else? What other pieces make up the puzzle of Romanticism?
Well, one of the big ones, maybe the most important, is their emphasis on imagination and freedom. They saw imagination as like this tool for breaking free from the limitations of the physical world, for envisioning new possibilities.
Yeah, like they were saying, we don't have to be bound by the way things have always been done. We can use our imagination to create something new, something better, something beautiful.
Exactly. And this spirit of like rebellion and innovation wasn't just in their art and literature, it influenced their views on society and politics too.
Oh, interesting. So Romanticism wasn't just about creating pretty things. It was also about pushing for social change.
Absolutely. They were often at the forefront of movements advocating for things like individual rights and social justice.
Wow. So for them, imagination wasn't just about daydreaming. It was about envisioning a better world and then actually working to make it happen. Yes. And this brings us back to that idea of, the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, which is a big part of what fueled their creativity and their activism.
Yeah, that phrase has been bouncing around in my head ever since we read it. It's like they were giving us permission to, well, feel things deeply.
Exactly. It was a rejection of that Enlightenment idea that we need to suppress our emotions
Mhm.
or keep them under tight control. The Romantics were all about embracing the full spectrum of human experience.
The good, the bad, the messy, the beautiful. It's like they were saying, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to feel deeply. In fact, that's what makes us human.
Exactly. And this emphasis on feelings and subjectivity led to a real revolution in the arts. Romantic artists and writers weren't bound by those strict rules and conventions anymore. They were experimenting with new forms, new techniques, new ways of using language to evoke emotion and create a sense of, like, immediacy and authenticity.
So instead of trying to be objective and detached, the Romantics embraced the unique perspective of each individual. They were celebrating the beauty of subjective experience.
Exactly. They understood that each person sees the world through a different lens, and they were fascinated by those individual differences. They believed that true understanding comes from embracing those diverse perspectives, not trying to erase them.
It's amazing how this focus on the individual and the subjective experience really paved the way for so much of the art and literature we cherish today.
It's true. The Romantics really opened up this whole new way of seeing the world, a world that embraced emotion, imagination, and the power of individual expression. And their influence is still felt today, centuries later.
Absolutely. But we can't talk about Romanticism without discussing one major historical event that really shaped the movement,
You're right, it was a pivotal moment in history, and
the French Revolution.
you got it. The French Revolution was this huge event that really shook Europe to its core, and the tremors were definitely felt within the Romantic movement. And our sources talk about the revolution as having like two distinct phases, each contributing to Romanticism in its own way.
Okay, let's unpack that. What were these two phases and how did they influence the way the Romantics saw the world?
Well, that first phase was all about, challenging the old order, demanding liberty, equality, fraternity. It was a really hopeful time, the sense that anything was possible. And that energy, that revolutionary spirit, it really infused the work of a lot of Romantic writers and artists.
It's easy to see how those ideals, liberty, equality, fraternity, really resonated with the core values of Romanticism. Individual freedom, the rejection of hierarchies, the celebration of what connects us as humans. I can only imagine how inspiring that energy must have been for them.
Yeah, the revolution really gave voice to their yearning for change, for a more just society. It was like a real-world example of how people can come together and challenge injustice and demand a better world. But as we know, things didn't end on a happy note with the French Revolution.
Yeah, with the rise of Napoleon, things took a much darker turn. How did that impact the Romantic movement?
Well, Napoleon was a really complex figure, kind of a mixed bag. He represented both the turbulent energy of the time and also the potential for both great good and great destruction. And for some Romantics, he was really fascinating, the symbol of ambition and power.
But for others, he represented, the dangers of unchecked ambition and the betrayal of those revolutionary ideals that they had initially been so excited about.
Exactly. One of our sources mentions Byron as a prime example of this complex reaction to Napoleon. He was initially really passionate about the revolution, but he became pretty disillusioned by the violence and the bloodshed.
It's like the Romantics got this front row seat to both the best and the worst of humanity, all within a really short period of time. The French Revolution started with all these high hopes, but then it devolved into violence and tyranny.
Right, and this really had a profound effect on their worldview. It led some of them to become, more introspective and melancholic. They started questioning things like the nature of power and the limits of human reason and whether hope could even survive in a world filled with so much suffering.
It sounds like the French Revolution was this double-edged sword for them. It gave them hope and inspiration, but it also left them with a sense of disillusionment and this awareness of just how complex human nature can be.
It really shows how much historical events can shape our thinking and our art. The French Revolution forced the Romantics to confront these really challenging questions, questions that honestly we're still grappling with today.
It's incredible how those ideas from centuries ago can still feel so relevant today. So as we continue our deep dive into Romanticism, let's keep this backdrop of the French Revolution in mind. It helps us understand this fascinating movement in a much deeper way.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about how these big historical events shape our art and our thinking. It's like this push and pull between hope and disillusionment. But even with all the chaos and change of the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution happening at the same time, there's another important side to Romanticism that we need to explore.
Okay, what else did they have going on?
Well, we've talked about their love for nature and their focus on individual experience.
Right.
But along with all of that, the Romantics really yearned for a simpler life. They wanted a world that wasn't so burdened by all the complexities of modern society.
It makes sense. If you're living in a time when everything's changing so fast, with factories popping up and cities growing like crazy and the whole pace of life speeding up, wouldn't you want to escape to something simpler, something more real?
Exactly. And this idea of escaping to a simpler life, it's closely tied to their love for nature,
Yeah.
right? They saw nature as a refuge from all those pressures, a place to reconnect with yourself and find some peace.
Our sources point to Rousseau, that philosopher, as a big influence here. His ideas about the noble savage and how civilization corrupts us, that really resonated with the Romantics.
Right, Rousseau believed that deep down humans are good, but that all the artificial stuff that comes with society, that's what corrupts us. And this idea really fueled their desire for a simpler, more natural way of living.
And this idealization of the simple life, we see it reflected in a lot of the Romantic writers, especially Wordsworth.
Oh, absolutely. Wordsworth was all about finding inspiration in the ordinary, in the everyday lives of normal people. He celebrates things like, I don't know, a cottage girl, a simple old salesman, even the sound of the wind or the songs of birds.
Like he was saying, hey, look around you. There's beauty and poetry everywhere, even in the most mundane things.
Exactly. He elevated the everyday, finding meaning in those moments that most people just overlook.
Yeah.
And this brings us back to that idea of finding the extraordinary within the ordinary, right?
Right. It's like they had these special glasses that let them see magic in the mundane.
I like that, magic glasses. So to recap, we've got mystery and wonder, love of nature, fascination with the past, focus on the individual, yearning for a simpler life. I think we're starting to get a pretty good picture of what makes up Romanticism. But is there anything else we're missing?
Well, one of our sources calls this next one the cardinal characteristic of Romanticism. So it sounds like a big one. Any guesses?
The cardinal characteristic, you say? Okay, I'm thinking. Could it be their emphasis on imagination?
You nailed it. Imagination was huge for the Romantics. They saw it as a tool to break free from the limitations of the real world, a way to see all sorts of possibilities that might not exist yet.
Yes. And this spirit of pushing boundaries, it wasn't just in their art. They challenged the status quo in all areas of life.
So they weren't afraid to stir things up a bit.
Oh, not at all. The Romantics were often right there in the middle of all these social and political movements, questioning authority, challenging traditions, and advocating for, for things like individual rights and social justice.
Wow. So for them, imagination wasn't just about daydreaming. It was about actually trying to make the world a better place.
Yes. They saw imagination as this driving force for positive change, a way to break free from the past and create a better future. And this brings us right back to that idea of, the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings that we talked about earlier.
I love that phrase. It's like they were saying, hey, it's okay to feel deeply, to really let your emotions flow.
Exactly. They rejected that Enlightenment idea of always being rational and in control. They embraced the whole range of human emotions.
The light and the dark, the happy and the sad, all of it.
All of it. They believe that's what makes us human. And this whole emphasis on feeling and individual experience, it led to some really big changes in the arts.
Mhm.
Romantic artists and writers, they weren't so concerned with following the rules anymore. They were experimenting with different forms, new techniques, finding new ways to use language, to express emotion and create this sense of immediacy, like you were right there with them.
So it's almost like they were giving people permission to express themselves more freely, more authentically.
Exactly. And their work, it wasn't just about pleasing the critics or following the trends. It was about expressing their own unique perspectives and emotions, connecting with their audience on a deeper level.
And this willingness to experiment, to break free from the old rules, it led to some of the most iconic art and literature that we still admire today, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Huh.
I mean, think about the symphonies of Beethoven, the poems of Keats, the paintings of, so many romantic artists. They captured something so powerful, so universal about human experience.
And they're still moving us, inspiring us, challenging us all these centuries later. It's amazing.
It's almost like their work, it taps into something timeless about the human condition. These themes of love and loss and longing and the search for meaning. They're things that we all grapple with, no matter what time period we live in.
It's like their words and their art, they act as mirrors, reflecting back to us our own hopes and fears and dreams. They remind us that even in the middle of all the chaos and change and, all the craziness of life, there's still beauty, there's still wonder, there's still hope. It's kind of crazy how these themes we've been talking about, they're from centuries ago, but they still feel so relevant to our lives today.
It is pretty wild, right? Yeah. But one thing that's been striking me as we talk about these characteristics of Romanticism is how much they seem to, like, offer this alternative to our super technology-driven world.
Yeah, like almost like a counterpoint to all the screens and the constant information overload. It's almost like the more plugged in we get, the more appealing those romantic ideals become. Connecting with nature, embracing individual expression, searching for authentic experiences.
Right. It's like this quiet rebellion against the pressure to always be connected, to always be optimizing yourself. We still have this deep human need for something real, something that touches our hearts and souls.
I mean, think about it. Back then, the Romantics, they were dealing with these huge societal changes brought about by the Industrial Revolution. Factories, urbanization, this crazy acceleration of the pace of life.
Exactly. And how did they respond? By looking to nature for comfort, by exploring the depths of human emotion, and by celebrating the power of imagination.
It's amazing how their response to the challenges of their time actually mirrors some of the challenges we face today. Like, in a world that's so dominated by algorithms and social media, that romantic emphasis on, individual expression and authentic experience, it feels like, well, I don't know, it just feels really refreshing.
Yeah, and it's not even just about, like, escaping technology or anything. It's more about remembering that there's still beauty and wonder all around us if we just slow down and really pay attention.
One of the sources talks about this romantic fascination with, how do they put it? It's like the presence of the unseen, this idea that there's something more out there than what we can just, see and touch and hear.
Yeah, like there's this whole other level of reality beyond our five senses.
Right. It's like they were trying to help us see the magic that's hidden beneath the surface of things, the stuff we usually just take for granted.
The Romantics were really tuned into that, weren't they?
Yeah.
That sense of wonder, of awe, of recognizing how everything is connected in this big, beautiful web of existence.
Yeah. And not being afraid to explore the mysteries, to ask the big questions. It's like they were inviting us to step outside our comfort zones, and to be open to new ways of seeing the world.
And that's a really powerful message, especially now when everything feels so uncertain and, well, the world is changing so fast. Romanticism kind of gives us this framework for navigating all that uncertainty, not by ignoring it, but by embracing our emotions, by tapping into our resilience, and by letting our imaginations run wild.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Romanticism, what do you think is the most important thing for our listener to take away from all of this?
That's a good question. I think the most valuable thing we can learn from the Romantics is that sense of wonder and possibility. Even when the world feels chaotic, there's still beauty to be found.
Mhm.
There's still meaning to be made and connections to be forged.
Yeah, it's about remembering that we have this amazing power within us, the power of imagination, the power of our emotions, the power to connect with each other and with the natural world.
Absolutely. And to kind of end with a little something for our listener to ponder, I'd ask them to think about this. How can you bring a little bit of that romantic spirit into your own life? How can you cultivate a sense of wonder in your daily experiences? How can you use your imagination to create positive change, even in your own little corner of the world?
Yeah, those are great questions. And on that note, we'll leave you to continue exploring romanticism on your own. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.